Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Lead with Less. I am Tash, your host and people leadership coach. Although today I'm not actually the host of this podcast episode, Daria Williamson, if you have been with Lead with Less right from the beginning, Daria was actually my first guest that I brought onto the episode, and she reached out and asked, would I be interested in being interviewed for my own podcast? And she's also writing a book around leadership. So this is going to benefit us both. And she wanted to interview me and find out some of my thoughts and outside of a structured, like, this is the episode that I'm talking about today. So I'm really interested to see how this goes. I'm also very nervous. But Daria, before we jump in, for those who haven't been here since the start, do you just want to give a brief little intro and then we'll dive in? And actually you'll just take over and tell us what we're doing here and what we're talking about.
Perfect. Thanks, Tash. Delighted to be here and delighted that you liked the idea of being interviewed on your own podcast. So thank you for the opportunity. And I do acknowledge your courage. It's a weird situation to be in. So I appreciate you fronting out and we're going to have a lot of fun. So I'm Daria Williamson. I'm a personal strengths and leadership coach and trainer. I developed the Strengths Deck, which is a card-based approach to figuring out not just what you're good at, but what actually truly lights you up so that you can bring more of your unique brand of magic to the world. Alongside that, I wrote Unleash Your Awesome, which I published last year, which is a strengths-based coaching program in a book, also available as an audiobook. And it's really about figuring out how to do more of what lights you up and then how to take a strengths-based approach to your life and work. So that overlaid with my love for leadership and helping people step up into their leadership presence. That's why I'm here today, because I really respect your approach to leadership and the work that you're doing. And I just thought, what better way to further the conversation about leadership development and how to be an awesome leader than having a chat with you.
Oh, amazing. And what I love particularly about this is we both work in the same space, the same arena. We talk about the same things, but there's no level of competition. It's not like, oh, I can't collaborate with her because she does the same work as me. That kind of finite thinking, if we want to use Simon Sinek's language there. That's what I really love about this. And just in my connection with you, it's like there's never been this feeling of competition. There's just been this feeling of, actually, how do we just continue to boost each other? How do we continue to get our messages out to the world? And I just love that.
Yeah, me too. And more I'm seeing people taking this approach, right? The only person I'm competing with is me from yesterday. I just want to be better today than I was yesterday, but in a really nurturing way. So I'm not pushing myself. It's not about having to earn our place in the world, as we talked about before we started recording. But we can just find space to grow and develop. And then we have wonderful people around us, generous people around us who can help us on that journey. So I love the dynamic we have too.
Mm,
All right. So shall we dive on in?
let's go.
Great. So first of all, I'd just love if you could explain a little bit about what your leadership journey has been and how that has shaped your leadership philosophy.
Love this question. Well, my background is in HR. So I studied HR, built my career in HR, and I worked in a lot of different industries and organizations. I worked in core government, secondary government, consulting, technology, membership organizations, all sorts. And I think it's really interesting, your leadership journey, because when do we define when we step into that, right? And I know this is something we talk about a lot, but it's so many people come to me and they're like, but I'm not a leader. And I'm like, aren't you? You know, you're influencing people, you're impacting people, you're helping people be better versions of themselves. That's leadership, right? And for me, if I look at technically, my first technical leadership role wasn't until 2017 when Penny Barton poached me from a Big Four, where I was technically an assistant HR manager, but had no kind of real element of that. That's just the professional services hierarchy. But that was like my real first technical manager role, people and performance manager. I built a team. We built our HR function from scratch. I recruited people, I developed them, I helped them grow, I coached them, all of that stuff. And that was, I guess, my technical step into leadership. But if I think about my career up until then, especially in HR, I felt like I was a leader a lot earlier because of the work that we do as an HR professional, where we're advising managers, we're helping them lead. So essentially you're leading them. And I think that's always been something that I've really had to, actually, I'm going to be a bit vulnerable. It's something that I still grapple with today, right? Because that was my technical leadership role, for about 2 years. And then I started my own HR consulting practice. Then I started my coaching practice. And now I've been coaching leaders. And I still have this like dissonance sometimes of like, but I'm not really a leader because I don't have this really big team where I'm managing in a corporate. And, I'm not sitting on the senior leadership team or the management team with other people. And I sometimes still have to grapple with that of like, am I genuinely a leader? Can I really say that I am? But I am, right? Because I have influence through the work that I do. I have influence through my clients, through the content that I create, through the programs that I run, and that's leadership. And I do have a small team that works in my business, and I have one-on-ones with them, and I do all of that stuff. But it's interesting, and I think that's what's really shaping a lot of my philosophy around leadership is this trying to deconstruct the constant labeling, titling that comes around this, and really just helping people tap into the essence of how they're leading, who they're being. If we want to use quotes, Brene Brown, who we are is how we lead. Like, who are people being day to day? How are they showing up? How are they doing things? How they're responding to people? How they're influencing? How they're connecting? And I guess for me, my philosophy is how do we just tap into more of that in everyday people? Because I think that the more that we do that for everyday people, the more empowered leadership we'll have, and so much of the world will be different.
I love that you've called out that, am I a leader? What is it to be a leader? I grapple with this myself, right? Solopreneur. I don't have anyone else in my business. Am I a leader? Technically, no, but actually, yes. And so that what is leadership really about? I mean, you used the word influence, and that's a really, really big one for me as well, is if you are influencing others, you are demonstrating leadership. Now we can talk about whether the influence is for good or not, but influence to me is the inherent defining nature of leadership. And so people ask me when my leadership journey started. I say, oh, I think I was about 7 when I got my first leadership role at school. And so, you know, I think we need to get away from that. A leader looks like a particular thing or holds a particular corporate role, and think more broadly about leadership and how it operates amongst, as you say, kind of everyday people rather
Mm.
than some hero. All right. How do you define effective leadership? And has that definition evolved over time?
Yes, definitely. I think now effective leadership to me is humans, like human focused and outcomes focused. I think both of those things together has really compiled into me defining effective leadership. And I did a podcast episode about effective versus people focused and can you be both? And it's kind of that same idea of to be effective as a leader, we need to be creating outcomes. Things need to be getting done. If we go to the technical term of management, things need to progress, like tasks need to be completed, like work needs to get done. So that effectiveness of being outcomes orientated, and I specifically use outcomes orientated as the wording because it's not about controlling how things are done and the steps and all of that stuff. It's, are people creating the outcomes that we're looking for? Are people creating outcomes that create results? That's leadership, right? Like we need that, and we need humanness. We're so far removed from the industrialized era of you go to work, you work at a machine, and then you go home, we data entry. Like we're not in that space anymore. And with Gen Z now entering the workforce, we're navigating a generation of people who want more. Like they want more humanness, they want more connection, they want more purpose, they want more life. It's not just about work. And I think that's the human piece that is so important in effective leadership of how do we just connect as humans? How do we genuinely just treat people like humans, connect with them like humans, and create environments and spaces where the humanness can be present as well as the outcomes get done. The outcomes get delivered. And I was just doing some research recently for another podcast episode around our well-being is actually deteriorating for the first time since COVID because of all the return to work mandates and all of this stuff. Like we're regressing back to where we were because we're forgetting the human element. Like, yes, we want outcomes to be the focus. Like we want outcomes, we want progress. And we need to also think about what gets our people to do their best work. And that's effective leadership to me, is that both of those things are consistently part of the conversation, part of the focus, part of the drive every single day, not just when we get our engagement survey and we see well-being's down, or not just when we find out half our team is burning out because half them are sick all the time, that this is the ongoing part of the conversation every single day.
Love that. Like they hold tension between them, the people focus and the outcomes focus. If we go too far to one side, we get a rubber band effect, right? If we go too far to outcomes, eventually the people side will snap back, because if we don't treat our people well and look after them, they're going to either burn out or leave, or potentially both. And so holding that tension between them is a really healthy thing. Brene Brown talks a lot about the power of the paradox, and that's the only thing that can actually hold the complexity of
Yeah.
the world that we live in.
Yeah, and I put up a reel recently where I was like, it's not that flippin' hard. When we say tension, it sounds like, oh my gosh, there's
Mm,
tension and it sounds hard, but it's actually not flippin' hard. Like
mm,
if I'm going to be really controversial, it's like leadership at its core is actually very flippin' simple. It's when we listen to people. We set clear expectations, which is what creates the outcomes. That's one huge thing that's generally missed from management and leadership, is clear expectations, because then people don't really know what they're doing. But then two, the human is listening. Like, what is it that my people are actually trying to tell me? And am I asking the right questions in order to get the answers I need, in
mm,
order to lead well? This is the challenge. It's too much assuming is happening, too much reading between the lines is happening, because people think that that's what good leadership is I should just know, I should just try and
mm.
figure it out, and I should just know what helps my people. No, literally just ask them and then listen. Like, genuinely listen to what they have to say. It's be clear in your outcomes, what you're looking for, and be intentional with how you listen. When we do those two things well and we practice that consistently, everything else actually starts to fall into place, because we start to recognize, oh, these are my gaps. Okay, this is where I just need to upskill a little bit more. Oh, okay, this is where I can maybe reach out for some help in order to better support these people. Or, okay, actually, not much is really needed here. That is actually going really well. So I'm not going to spend my energy there. And it's because we're not listening and properly paying attention, we're diverting energy into other spaces that don't help our outcomes.
I think that gives us a really good segue into the next question I had for you, which is, what are a couple of the most common challenges that new leaders face, and how can they overcome them?
I was thinking about this when I read this one. I think that the number one challenge is dealing with difficulty. And I think difficulty in different contexts. So whether that's toxic behavior, whether that's performance, whether that's difficult situations that people are coming into, team dynamics, all of those things, conflict. And then there is difficult people.
Mhm.
And I did an episode on this where, are they difficult or are they different? I think this is one of the biggest challenges I see, is the lack of skill and the lack of courage in dealing with difficult situations. Number one, because they think that they need to solve it. And so often that stops them from leaning into it, right? Because they're like, well, I don't have the solution. Like, I don't really know how to fix this problem. So I'm just going to not deal with it. I'm just going to avoid it. I'm just going to hope that it kind of figures itself out.
Mhm.
And then that courage, right? That courage to be vulnerable, that courage to be able to go, hey, I don't know, but I'm willing to have this conversation with you so I can try and understand. And because what creates this challenge is idea or the myth of needing to be the expert. Because a lot of new managers, new leaders are usually great individual contributors, right? They're
Mhm.
stepping out from individual contribution, and there's a huge reliance on that achievement and being great at what we do and being able to deliver and delivering outcomes and all that stuff, to now stepping into a position where you're managing people and personalities and different situations. And it's, yeah, that ability to be able to step back and go, I can't be the expert. That's actually no longer my job. My job isn't to be the expert. My job is now to be the facilitator. My job is now to be able to
Mm.
create space and hold space and ask questions to figure out what's going on, and then leverage the people on my team to create solutions, or leverage other people to create solutions. And that's what we talked about in our episode around, what's my genius strengths? What do I bring to the table? And how do I leverage people around me to close my gaps, right? To close
Mm.
my weaknesses. And so that's common challenge number one that I see a lot, is that inability, or not, like the lack of skill and the lack of courage to deal with difficult situations. And then the second one is the challenge of taking the lead. And this kind of speaks to that question we got in LinkedIn, right? Like, how do you step up from within a team? And This is that taking the lead of, I'm here to drive the team forward. I'm here to ensure that we create outcomes. And I'm also here to make sure that you are supported and that you are looked after and that you're in an environment that helps you to be your best. Genuinely taking the lead from a place of, is authority the word I want to use? Maybe you have a word. Like taking the lead from a place of, I guess, courage, confidence, power. I don't really know what word I really want to use. There's no like kind of standout word coming out to me, but with that kindness. So the word kind always comes to me from Kim Scott: care personally, challenge directly. Care personally about your people, but I'm here to challenge you. I'm here to make things move. I'm here to make sure our team grows. I'm here to make sure that we deliver on our outcomes, that we are successful, that we are meeting our KPIs. And I care personally about who you are as a person. And that's the challenge that a lot of new leaders face, is how do I do that in a way that feels authentic to me, but then also makes an impact? And I think the answer is being honest. I've stepped up. This is where I'm nervous. This is where I feel uncomfortable. This is really what I'm aiming to do as the team. I want to understand how I can lead you. What does that look like? And this is something that I talk about with new leaders. The 5 key questions to ask is, how do you prefer to be led? What are past experiences that show up for you that I need to be aware of when I lead you? How do you prefer to receive feedback? And how do you feel when you're at your best? And how do you feel when you're not at your best? Because all of that contributes to how I can show up and lead you. And once you know that for every person in your team, your ability to adapt how you lead them becomes so much easier. And you're not trying to read between the lines and trying to assume and trying to make it up. You have the ability to actually take the lead because you've made the effort to get to know your people. And once people feel like they're cared for, they'll want to follow you. We love following people who care for us, who have an invested interest in us. And I think that is the antidote to that challenge.
Mm-hmm. 2 things really stood out for me, what you've just said. First of all, shout out to Radical Candor, Kim Scott's book. Excellent, excellent book. Doesn't matter where you are on your leadership journey, read the book, devour it, reread it, highlight it. It's fantastic, particularly because I think it's very easy as a new leader to fall outside of what she calls radical candor, which is care personally, challenge directly. I know I was terrible when I started. I either challenged directly with no care, or I cared too much and wouldn't challenge. And so I was completely unhelpful to the people I led. She talks about ruinous empathy, so kind and nice. Didn't want to upset the apple cart. So I wasn't actually holding people accountable to the standards we'd agreed. Or the other, I can't remember what the other quadrant is, but
Obnoxious aggression.
Yes. So obnoxious aggression was
and manipulative insincerity.
So I don't think, although you could ask the people that I first led whether I fell into the manipulative insincerity, but I think I vacillated between obnoxious aggression and ruinous empathy because I didn't know how to combine I care for you and also you need to pull your socks up because you're not doing what we agreed. And so that particularly for new leaders really stands out for me. And the other thing that you said, which I think is absolute gold, is about adaptability. So often, when we're a new leader, we think of leadership, this particular set of actions in this particular way. So we only have a single monolithic model that we try to apply to every single situation and person we encounter. But as we grow on our leadership journey, we realize actually the way I manage person A is totally going to be wrong for person B or situation C. And so there's freedom in that, but it's also terrifying because where are my guardrails? Like if I think of leadership as a monolith, good, okay, I have my one set of actions that I apply everywhere, effective or not. But if now I'm responsible for looking around and tuning into the situation, what's going on for them, what's going on for me, what do we need here to help us get to that overall goal that we're aiming for? It's a lot more hard work, but of course the outcomes are so much better.
Well, my challenge there would be, if you listen, it's not hard. I totally get it, because that was exactly like me, right? Like, oh my God, how do I now think about, okay, well, this person likes this and this person likes that, and it's like this. And this is not about, in the realm of parenting, it's not about permissive parenting or like permissive management where your team is like running the show and your team's running you. Like that's not what this is. And it's not about giving free rein to your team to decide, because that is your job as a leader. Like they have input, you consult and you talk about it, and collectively you go, okay, what do we do moving forward? But ultimately you need to also be the driver of that. And it's not about making it so level playing field that kind of no one's taking the lead. But honestly, if people listen, so they ask good questions and they listen, you will know how to respond. You will build that skill on this is how I show up for this person. And okay, well, this person has this going on. I know about that because I listened to what they were talking about. But also ask them, hey, you're going through a tough time right now. How can I show up for you? How can I lead you through this so that, again, you're not trying to read between the lines? You're not trying to figure it out. And that's one of the things that is the most underrated things for new leaders is they're trying to figure it out rather than
Mm,
like, let's just say, I don't know. I'd really love to get your input so that I can give you what you need or I can show up in the way that you need because we don't know. Like, we don't know people. And one of the things that I talk about in my program, VIP Leaders, is mindset baggage and leadership baggage. Of everyone's coming to your team with all of their stuff from childhood, from school, from previous organizations. It's all there. And having these conversations of understanding your people, where are they at? What are they experiencing? What's coming up for them helps you to understand what some of that could be, which gives you insight, right? Of this person came from a really toxic organization, had a really toxic leader. These are some of the things that could really make them defensive or really set them off or make them really emotional. Okay. I know that this is how I would then approach something because I've talked to them about it. And I think that's the key, like the antidote to so many leadership challenges is listening, like asking good questions and listening. And you love that book too, but The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier, just a powerful book for asking great questions.
yeah,
Sorry,
love
I'm
that.
keep going on task tangents here.
That's perfect. That's exactly why I wanted to interview you because the Tash tangents are so valuable. So the next question we had was about key traits or skills that distinguish highly effective leaders. We've already talked about some of them, and you right there with ask really good questions and then listen and use the information you've gleaned. Foundational skill, right? Are there any other ones that you want to give a shout out to?
I think a skill, oh, you might challenge me on whether this is a skill. I mean, self-awareness is a skill. I think that's a skill. Self-awareness of your own mindset, going further than knowing what your strengths are and knowing what your gaps are and knowing what your preferences are. It's actually knowing what your mindset is. What are the beliefs you hold? What are the perceptions you have? What are the assumptions that you hold? Where do they come from? And what stories do you tell? So, in the context of leadership specifically, like what are the beliefs you have about being a leader? What are the beliefs you have about good leadership? What are the assumptions you make about leaders or about good or bad leaders? I don't like using those words, but
Yeah.
lack of better words. And then what are the perceptions that you make and the stories that you tell? Like the skill of knowing what your mindset is has a huge power in the way that you show up for yourself, but also how you interact with other people, right? Because our mindset is made up from our whole life experience. And our brain only has past experience to dictate future experience. And so we need to be aware of what are the past experiences, and this is the baggage that I was speaking about before. What is the past experience and the baggage that will cause me to react, respond, not listen, shut down, get reactive, all of those things. I think that's a really important skill. And from what I've seen, I don't see it talked about enough in that way. There is knowing self, but yeah, knowing self is good. But how does your brain actually work? 90% of how we're showing up is dictated by past experience. So, what are all of those experiences that's dictating the way that you show up? And especially for new leaders, you're either trying to emulate the best leaders you've seen, or you're trying to go so far the other end of the spectrum of the shit leaders that you've seen. You're either trying to overcompensate for the crap, or you're trying to mimic to the nth degree. Neither of those things are good. Like neither of those things are helpful because trying to mimic too much means that you lose your authenticity. You lose the true connection with who you are and how you can show up for your people. Trying to not be the crappiest leaders in the book means that we can fall into permissive leadership and we can fall into some of those other unhelpful ways. And all of that is mindset of those past experiences, what we see, what we consume, what we take in, what we pay attention to. All of that is dictating a lot of our beliefs, our values, and all of that stuff. And so the skill, I would say, another key skill is get to learn how your mindset works. Like, how is it built? Mindset by Carol Dweck. Amazing
Mm.
book to understand growth and fixed mindset. And especially this is where coaching is really powerful, is working with someone to really challenge you, because reading books is great. Listening to podcasts is great. You're here, you're listening to this one, but there's only so much self challenge you can do on yourself. But having someone to really push that for you, I think that's a key skill, because this also drives our ability to have difficult conversations. It drives our ability to give feedback, to receive feedback, to influence people, to be emotionally intelligent, to emotionally regulate. Your mindset dictates all of those skills. And those are all the 5 skills that I teach in my programs. But fundamentally, it all starts with mindset. So that would be the other key skill of really learning how to master your own mind. I'm interrupting this episode to let you know that VIP Leaders, my leadership development program, is currently open for enrollment. VIP Leaders is my signature program that helps you strengthen your leadership identity, build trusted influence, and level up your emotional intelligence to become a leader people actually want to follow. The next round is starting very soon in February 2025. So if you are interested in leveling up your leadership skills, giving you everything that you need to be a leader people actually want to follow, head down into the show notes and click VIP Leaders to find out more. And if you've got questions, reach out and let me know. All right, let's head back to the episode.
I love that. When I'm with the book I'm writing at the moment, I've got it in 3 parts, and the first part is leading self. Because if you can't do that, kind of none of the rest of it matters. You're not going to be
Mhm.
able to show up in the best way if you're not actually digging into the, yes, what are my practices and preferences and my personality quirks and my strengths and weaknesses, but as you said, diving deeper. So the baggage that I bring with me, because we've all got it, what does that predispose me to in tricky situations? Because generally most of us don't have a problem turning up as our best self in the easy times. But the making of the leader, the mark of the leader is, so how do you navigate the tricky situations, the tricky moments, the tricky chapters? And that's where, I talk in the book about the importance of having someone that you reflect with. And that can be a coach, it could be a therapist, it can be people in similar types of roles to you who can just say, well, this is what I'm experiencing, or, this is what's worked for me. Mentors, people who've been there, done that, got the t-shirt and now want to help you figure it out. But yeah, going outside, just personal reflection to get those external lenses is so super helpful.
Brilliant.
Comfortable as shit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I always say it's like, "Oh, can I be less self-aware, please?" That would just be so
Yeah.
great. It's like, let me go back to being ignorant. But yeah, and I really love what you said around it really is about how we show up in the hard times. And we see this through memes and everything on social media about relationships. You want someone who'll love you when you're the worst version of yourself. And
Mhm.
leadership is the same. Like, you're not going to get it right. You're going to screw up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong things. You're going to do all of those things because you are human. And your team actually doesn't need you to be perfect. No one needs you to be perfect. People need you to be human, need to hold that humanity. And I think the more that we can embrace that while aiming for better, right? Aiming for excellence, aiming for all of those good words, not perfect.
Mhm.
That's what the leadership is. It's that long journey.
And that just brings to mind for me the importance of self compassion. There's all that research around people fear being self compassionate because they think that'll make them permissive, that they won't strive for excellence. But all the research shows the opposite, that if you are self compassionate, can meet yourself where you're at when you're down in the dust because you did the wrong thing, said the wrong thing, or harmed a relationship. If you can dust yourself off and go, oops, here I am experiencing humanity, make amends if you need to make amends, and then move forward. That actually takes us far closer to excellence than self-flagellation, being super, super hard on ourselves and unforgiving. So
Mm,
one of my recommendations for new leaders is figure out how you can be your own best friend, because often we're really good at being our best enemy,
yep.
but the transition to being your best friend is a big help on your leadership journey. So going to that, how do you think we can best support those emerging new leaders to develop their leadership presence and practice?
I would say invest in them earlier. So not wait until they're in their positions of leadership, which is what we see happen time and time again. I've got my team. Oh, okay. Well, how do I lead? I kicked off the VIP leaders, and there are a few people on there who've been leading teams and have had no formal support to do that, which is heartbreaking. And it makes me so angry that in 2024, this is still happening. It's so frustrating. But how can we support them? My tagline for VIP leaders is become the leader people actually want to follow.
Mm.
And when I talk to leaders, I'm like, who do you wish you had when you started? And I work with a lot of senior leaders, and they're like, oh, but they just need to do it this way. And I was like, okay, well, when you were them 20 years ago, is that what you were feeling? Were you just wanting someone to say they just need to figure it out? No, you weren't. That is not what you were saying 20 years ago. You're saying that now because of where you are. And how we can support them is, one, listen, like genuinely ask, like, hey, where are you at? What is your level of skill set? Because again, a lot of the people that are being promoted, excellent individual contributors. They are great at what they do. And they're probably very respected by their peers because they are good at what they do, right? So there is that natural level of respect that kind of comes. But again, as we know from that person that asked the question, it's just a different dynamic once you step into that role. But one, ask better questions. Ask the questions of, where are your people actually at? Where are they? How are they feeling? What is the experience? What are the stories that they're telling themselves? Actually get to know what is going on in their brain, in their body. And then what is it that they need? So what is it that they need in order to be supported? Now, I will caveat that with, they may not know what that is either, right? So this is where your expertise as someone who has experience, who has been a leader, what are the things that you wished you had had? And again, it's not saying this is what it is. It's saying, hey, these are the things I wished I had had. Would that be helpful for you? Would that help you on your journey? Invest in them to do external training, external coaching and training. I'm all for internal training and workshops and things like that, but there is something different about external because of the ability to share what they wouldn't share otherwise. The ability to open up about things that they wouldn't otherwise open up because they know that everyone in that room probably knows their manager. We'd love to say Chatham House rules, but humans love to have a little bit of a chat. Actually invest in your people in the right way that gives them the skill set that will take them further than just this role. Think infinitely, right? Like Simon Sinek talks about, think beyond just them doing this job for your company right now, because they are in charge of the people who might stay here for another 20 years. And you want to make sure that they're having a bloody good experience if they're going to be here in 20 years' time.
That's such a great point about the longevity of the impact that people have. So I was reflecting today on, why am I writing this book? Because I'm stuck in the messy middle, but also what's the impact I want to have? And I was thinking about, whenever we work with a leader, we've got this multiplier effect, because while we might be working with that leader as an individual person, they have a boss, they have team members, they have colleagues. Conservative estimate, when you work with one leader, you're affecting 10 people. And so that ripple effect that goes out from the investment or not investing in people, from the development or not developing them, it goes just in the first round to 10 people. So the second, third, fourth order effects are massive. But I also love what you've brought in about that, and over time. So the people in the team may not change. That leader may move on. And this is often one of the arguments we hear against investing in leadership training, right? What if I train my people and they leave? But what if you don't train your people and they stay? So actually thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the track, rather than let's keep the training budget within its numbers this quarter, it's a really different perspective on the world. And I've had many conversations with leaders in New Zealand while I've been researching for the book. And the thing that we just keep coming up with is, how many other jobs do you appoint someone into that has a specific set of skills and competencies, and you say to them, if you meet all of your targets for 3 years, I might train you how to do that stuff. It is ridiculous when you think
Oh, can I just cry? Just freaking cry. I mean, you're only talking about workplace ripple effect. You didn't even talk about their children, their partners, their PTA group at school, their 3-year-old soccer group that they coach on the weekends. Like, you're not even talking about that stuff. That takes it to a ripple of 50, 60, 70 easy, right? And that's, and this is like the challenge, like I love organizations who really are invested in developing leaders. Again, though, it's happening too close to the promotion stage. Oh, they're going to promote in the next year. We better give them something now. Or they've just promoted. We better give them something now. And this is also why I've got my Thriving New Professionals program for self-leadership at the beginning of their career, because those are your leaders. Like,
Yeah.
they're your leaders. And we're not thinking there, right? All leadership skills, we talk about mindset and influencing and giving feedback, having difficult conversations, emotional intelligence, how to coach. That isn't only for people who manage people. That is
Mhm.
for every single person should know how to do those things. Like, case in point, my husband and I are currently having a whole range of courageous conversations, and it's hard. And I train on this. I coach on this. Like, I teach people how to do this, but I'm having to really live it. We need these skills everywhere. And I think one thing I would say about support and training and helping immersion leaders is do it earlier than you're doing it. And wherever you're doing it in your pipeline and your cycle and your training development ecosystem, do it even earlier. Because just imagine this. A manager knows how to have difficult conversations. They've got the skills, they do it well. Imagine if every one of their 10 direct reports knew exactly how to do that.
Mhm.
Imagine. Imagine if every single one of those people in that team knew how to do that very well. It would be constructive conflict. There would be some serious, helpful, empowering, amazing self solutioning happening. But again, we think about the one person. It's like, let's just train them.
Yeah.
It's like, but imagine. And so, yeah, that's like my one thing that I'm like, I'm going to change the world on this.
Well, see,
Help me.
I don't have to imagine that, because the first business that I was in when I got my first leadership role, they did that.
Oh,
Everybody in the organization got
amazing.
exactly the same training on communication, and it was based on Development Dimensions International Communication Principles. And so everyone got taught, provide support without removing responsibility, ask for help and encourage involvement, so just these great principles. And then how to give affirming feedback, how to give redirecting feedback, how to have those courageous conversations. And it was not a perfect workplace because, again, humans, and we don't
Humans.
always have the conversations we need to have when we need to have them. But it was robust enough that if there was a problem, I could drop by your office and say, "Hey, Tash, I need to talk to you about something. Is now good?" You could say yes, or you could say no, let's do it such and such a time. But there was no, we don't get to talk.
Yeah.
And so I'd say, "Hey, I've just got some feedback for you. That situation, this is what you did. This was the impact on me. I would have rathered you did X and Y. And then you've got a chance to respond to that. And we just have this conversation as equals." And it was incredible because stuff gets pushed under the carpet, as you said earlier in our conversation, like, "Oh, I hope that goes away because I don't know how to deal with it." But all you end up with is a really freaking lumpy carpet because
Mhm.
it goes away,
Well, that's
accumulates.
actually what creates toxic cultures, if we want to get real blunt about it.
And so it's the early and often, if the plane is going off course, you want to know that 1 hour in, not 12 hours in. Because once you're 12 hours in, you're way away off course. You're going to end up in a different country. So the sooner we can get to it, and to your point, the sooner we can do this training so that people can get to these conversations sooner, the better off everyone is
Mm.
just within the workplace, let alone, as you said, and as I wholeheartedly believe, the ripple effects that go out through our community and society when we do this. And if we're helping people live better lives, that comes back to us in the workplace as well, because we have people who are better well-being, they're calmer, feel like they're more in control of what's going on in their lives. They're going to be able to bring even more of their best selves to work.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, I'd like to go to this question that we had through LinkedIn. So from Felix Udini, I checked in with him. He's happy for me to share his name with the question. He talked about, he's just been promoted to a leadership role. So he said, as someone who's just stepped into a leadership role, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to balance being approachable with maintaining authority.
My coaching hat just like immediately pops up and be like, okay, what do you believe about authority? That's my first question. What's your definition of authority? How does that show up for you? What is your story and your belief around authority? Because I know a lot of people, when they hear that word or they say that word, there's the authority. Yeah, because
Yeah.
authoritative is good, better. Authoritarian is the the one we don't want. Yeah. So my first question is always, what is authority and how are we using that in the context? But in terms of being approachable with maintaining authority, I think healthy authority is approachability as well. They're not mutually exclusive things, and probably going to stumble my way through this answer. So approachability is, to me, is people feel safe to come and talk to me about what they need to talk to me about. And they know that I will hold that space. I won't try and problem solve. I won't try and fix. I won't try and shut it down. That's approachability to me, that people can come and say what they're struggling with, or they can come and say that they've made a mistake, or they can come and say that something's gone completely off track, or that they need time away because something's happening in their personal life. And that starts with establishing a baseline of trust and respect. So in my one-on-one check-in template that I run with people, the first question is, what does trust and respect actually look like to you? What does it look like when you trust someone? What does it look like in action when you trust someone? What are they doing? What are they saying? How do they make you feel? All of those things. Because once that is established, approachability does come. It's like, hey, you've taken time to understand what that is for me. You've taken time to understand what is important to me. And then you also do that as a leader, right? You say, okay, well, this is what it looks like for me to trust you. This is what it looks like for me to be in trust of my team. And then we get agreement of, okay, this is how we show up. This is how we collectively behave. This is what we're going to pull each other forward on. So when this starts to slip, when this starts to go off track, this is what we're talking about. There's a baseline there. With that then is the second question, and this comes back to what I was talking about earlier, is how do I lead you so that you can be your best? I believe that that's authority. Authority isn't how do I control you so that you do your job. That's authoritarian, right? It's like, how can I direct you and control you and everything? That's micromanaging, all of that stuff. But it's how do I lead you? So that language is, I am the leader. I am leading you. I am leading the team. And I want to know how to do that in the best way that gets the best out of you. That is that connective piece. That's that humanity piece. It's not controlling of, I know what's best. You're going to do it this way. And I believe that that creates that stable ground of, okay, you're the leader. I know that I can come to you. Plus, we've agreed of what trust and respect looks like between us. And I believe that that's what creates both authority and approachability together. I'd love to hear your view, but that's how I would say that. And I think the reason that this often feels challenging for new leaders is because they don't have that initial conversation, right? They're just, oh, okay, I'm put into this job. Now I'm going to manage, or now I'm going to lead. And then they're trying to figure it out rather than asking questions and listening and then moving forward from there.
I love that. So I actually dug into this a little bit with Felix. So he was promoted from within the team, which is often how people get that first leadership. And in my mind, that is the trickiest leadership situation you will ever face. Like everything that comes after that is actually easier than stepping up from amongst your peers into a leadership role. And so for me, my first leadership role, I went from temp to team leader. So I didn't even get through team member. I was the temp for a few weeks and then ended up as the team leader. And so I clearly remember that instinct to want to control because of that. You've been an excellent individual contributor because your expertise is valued. You end up in that situation of, oh, okay, so I have to be in charge. That's what leadership is. So control, expertise, I know best. And so I very definitely didn't have approachability. And it took quite some time for me to be able to learn, you referred to earlier, saying, I don't know, let's find out, or let me find out, having that intellectual humility and the ego humility to go, I don't know everything, I can't know everything, but I will figure this out with you because it's important. And so now when I work with emerging leaders, I very much talk about so many things similar to you of actually nothing works without trust. If you don't have trust, then authoritarianism is the only option you have, and it doesn't go very far. So trust really is the one thing you have to build. And I love the way you've described about, so what does that actually look like? It's all nice to say, oh, I want to build trust, but actually in the nitty gritty today, how I'm speaking to you, the decisions I'm making, the way I make those decisions, they're either going to build trust with you or they're going to erode trust. So I need to know what those things are. And to your point earlier, this is different for different people in the team. For some people, trust will be built by you sharing lots and lots of detail with them. With other people, trust will be built by you spending a lot of time listening to them and hearing their input and then demonstrating that you've taken their input on board. That doesn't mean that the decision changes. You may still end up with the same decision, but demonstrating that respect of I will listen to your concerns and I will feed them into my decision process.
Mm.
So for me, this is all small stuff. Like you never do one big thing
No.
that establishes trust, that makes you approachable, that maintains your authority. It is literally in every conversation you have, in every email you send, in every meeting you hold, in every decision you make, like all of those things together. And people, they remember high points and low points, like really high points and really low points, but mostly they consider your average. So if you are fairly consistently 95% of the time turning up in the same way, that's what they're going to trust you for.
Mm.
So if 95% of the time you turn up as a controlling twat like I was, they will trust that that's the version of me they're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
If I can turn up 95% of the time listening, understanding, being curious, and doing my best to weave different people's needs and expectations together, and 5% of the time I'm a twat, they're going to remember the 95 and they're going to forgive me for the 5. There's no getting away.
Mm.
You're going to do dumb stuff as a leader. You're going to absolutely flub stuff. That's not the bit that matters. The bit that matters is how you get up from that.
100%, and I'm learning this a lot with parenting. In the parenting world, they say 70%, especially in those
Mm.
formative years when the mindset is being developed. Or it's like if 70% of how you're showing up is in that gentle parenting, all of those things, that is what is going to develop their attachment and their mindset. And so it gives you a grace of 30% of like flipping out and having a rage moment and like getting angry and yelling and all those things. And I think that really applies like in the leadership space, like that consistency. You can even give yourself grace of 80, 85% of, and when we see those outbursts, if that is uncharacteristic, we give the benefit of the doubt, right? Because, oh, that's not how Paul normally is. I wonder what's going on. But if that's how Paul always is, it's like, what a fucking dick. But, and I guess this also comes back to vulnerability. And I think new leaders also struggle. It's a common challenge, right? The vulnerability piece of, hey, this is the kind of leader I really want to be. I'm figuring that out. This is what I'm working on. I'd love for you to keep pulling me forward. That doesn't negate authority. I think also we need to be careful when we put a lot of pressure on leaders of just always having it together and all of that stuff. Vulnerability is so powerful because it allows the team to also know that they can be human, that they are going to make a mistake sometimes or things aren't going to work out. And I think that that's also really powerful here is saying, yeah, hey, like, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. This is my first role. Like, let's even just be honest to that point. Hey, this is my first leadership role. This is what I'm working on. I'd love for you just to give me a bit of grace when I might slip, when I might not get it right, but I want you to bring it up. I want you to also have my self-awareness. Yeah, and it's being able to also do that and know that that doesn't take away unless you have some real assholes in your team. Like, you're not going to be able to change them if they're like, that's not my job. It's like, okay, well, are you really the kind of person I want on my team? And I'm going to put a caveat here. It's not your job's team to hold you. Absolutely not. It's not your job's team to hold you up. You need to have your own support system in place to be able to support you. And that's what your leader is meant to be for. But we can still be honest with our team about what we're working on, what we're developing, what we're learning, how we're growing, so that they know, so that they are aware, right? And this is what you're talking about in terms of communication. When people know what's going on, there's less fear, there's less anxiety, there's less impulsive behavior, there's less toxicity, all of that stuff. You don't have to share it all. Do it appropriately with boundaries, but communicate.
And I think that communication particularly goes down to when you know you've made a mistake, when you're
Yeah.
confronted with the fact you've made a mistake, actually fronting up to people and going, I got that wrong. And this is what I'm going to try and do to fix it. Number one, you give them a chance to go, well, actually, no, that's not going to fix it. But number two, it also demonstrates that actually failures are not fatal. Because
Mhm.
I think when we duck and dive as leaders, trying to get away from the fact that we absolutely muffed something up, we tell our teams that anything less than perfection is not okay. And so
Mhm.
that's going to lead them to hide stuff. It's going to lead them to run away rather than front up when something's gone wrong. But if we can model the, oops, that I didn't intend for that to happen, but I can see that the outcome is not what I wanted. Now I'm going to fess up to it, apologize if I need to apologize. And I'm very clear, if I need to apologize, you don't always need to apologize.
Mhm.
But when you do need to apologize, if you don't do it, it's really impactful on people if you skip that step. But then again, going back to self compassion, okay, I'm human. I've had a moment of humanity. That's fine. Dust myself off, take the learning, because there's always going to be a learning, and then move forward. And when we demonstrate that to our teams, that is a massive trust builder. So, we said it's always the little things, but that's a series of small things, acknowledging, apologizing, trying again, demonstrating learning. Each of those things builds another brick into the foundation of what we're trying to build.
Mhm.
And it's hard as anything. The ego does not like that. We want to believe that we always get it right, and if anything goes wrong, it's someone else's fault. But again, we need to be the change we want to see in the world, right? So
Yeah,
keeping
absolutely.
up, and so failure can actually be the path to your success.
Absolutely.
All right. So just to round us out here, what trends or changes in the leadership landscape are you most excited about or concerned with?
This is an interesting question. I think what I'm excited about is what's going to be necessary as Gen Z starts to really come into the workplace because they're the generation of 21 to 26, 27 now. I can't remember. They're really in that prime entering the workforce and they're a very different breed, right? And they're technologically native. They haven't grown up in a world like we did, where we didn't have the internet, we didn't have smartphones when we were younger. And I think that that's going to really challenge organizations on how they stay relevant, on how they stay attractive, on how they stay competitive with a very, very, very different generation of people. Millennials are really, we're at the high era of our careers, right? Like we're the predominance of leadership now. Like we're middle management, we're going into senior leadership. Gen X is now getting to the later part of their careers. Like they're going into I think 60s. So like they're probably the C-suite.
Hey,
They're like
hey.
and boomers are really they're kind of really getting to a very different life stage. I'm not saying like Gen X is still at the height, right? I saw Kate Billings post about this. Like, I'm
Yes,
not getting into ageism or
that's
anything
it,
like
mate.
that. But what I'm really getting to is we're seeing a generation of people now that we've never seen before. It's just a very different mentality, a very different expectation. And I hate seeing how much entitlement is being placed on them. Like, oh, they're so entitled and they're lazy and they don't want to work hard and blah, blah, blah. It's like, but they just want to live. Like,
Mm.
they also just want to live a life, right? Which is very different to how we entered the workforce and what our mentality was. So that's what I'm really excited about is how are they going to shift the nature of work? How are they going to challenge organizations to lead differently? I think managing Gen X and millennials is just going to be a completely different ballgame to managing Gen Z, just even in terms of language. Like, what the hell are they even saying half the time? Like, Riz and no cap, and I don't even know. Ugh. So, that's what I'm really excited about. What I'm concerned with, I think, should have actually ended with excited, but what I'm concerned with, there's a lot of reverting back to comfort. There's a lot of reverting back to pre pandemic life. And
Mhm.
it's having a really, really big impact, quite detrimentally to people. And I'm concerned with the lack of care, the lack of foresight, the lack of long term thinking with some of those decisions, thinking that we can just go back, which we can't. We've proven that it works. We've
Yeah.
proven that a different way of work, of companies, of structure, we've proven that it works. Otherwise, the world literally would have collapsed and capitalism would have ceased to exist.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm concerned about. And I think both are intertwined, right? Because Gen Z had a lot of their early career years in that period, in that pandemic period. And so why should it change, right? If it's possible. So yeah, I think they are very interlinked, and I'm very interested. I'm very interested to see what happens, and it's really challenging for me because it's really challenging me in my leadership theory, in my leadership context, because I'm very used to to managing millennials. I know how they work, I know how they tick, I know how they think, and even just as a business owner, like, how do I talk to Gen Z? How do I show up? How do I make myself relevant, approachable, connecting to them? And I think that's what's really gonna challenge leadership is how do they adapt and shift how they are and how they lead to a very different workforce that's coming in.
Mm.
So, yeah,
And that links back to the adaptability piece we were
yeah.
talking about earlier, but also, again, we're back to kind of paradox of adaptability versus authenticity. Myself as a leader, my style, my preferences, my practices, how do I adjust those to
Yes.
get engagement with my audience or the people I'm leading without losing the authenticity piece? And there's no simple answer here. This is not one way to do things. I feel like that paradox is the piece that keeps us moving forward because we move to adaptability and we go, oh, actually, I might be letting go of some of my values here. So I pull back to my values. Now, am I actually being able to communicate in a way that's effective, that's getting the message across to the people who need to hear it? So, yeah, I think they're both challenges. Like, there are upsides and downsides of both of these things. And
Mm,
so, I agree with you, concerned about that pull back to the past world. I had a wonderful conversation with someone in the course of my research, and we were talking about the development of leadership since the 1940s. World War, people came back, military experience was massive. So, massive hierarchy, very dictated systems and processes, very rigid. So, people who came into management in the 1940s and 50s, 30, 40-year trajectory. So, now we're into the 1980s. 30 or 40-year trajectory. Now we're into the 2020s. Hello, right where we are. So we're
mm,
actually only 2 generations removed from wartime military rigid hierarchy. So it's no surprise that some of these pulls back to
yeah.
rigid, hierarchical, structured. I need to see you sitting in your seat to believe that you're working. So we're focusing on inputs rather than outputs, which is very industrial revolution. You've got to be at your machine 8 hours a day,
Mm,
otherwise the widgets don't get made. And I've been fascinated by this for 20 something years of do we focus on inputs or outputs? And I feel like when we're talking Gen Z, outputs,
yeah.
right? It doesn't matter.
Almost exclusively.
It doesn't matter when and where. So much work gets done as long as it is done. The difference, I used to run customer service teams, so we had to have people available to answer calls during the hours we said they would be available. So there is a difference there, but that doesn't mean they need to be physically co-located in the same space. They could be
Yeah.
anywhere in the world at any time with a laptop and an internet.
And again, the pandemic proved that because call centers still continue to run even though they couldn't sit next to it. Fundamentally, this comes back to mindset.
Mm,
What is our mindset in relation to this? And again, like our conditioning is the biggest aspect of our mindset. And yeah, when you actually laid it out like that, wow, it is only 2 generations. It feels like a billion years ago because that wasn't our time. And the same thing will happen 2 generations from now when people are like, oh my gosh, a pandemic happened. What? Like you couldn't go outside, you couldn't touch people. Like, oh my God, all of that stuff. And I mean, I really loved everything that you said there. And I think one thing that I talk about a lot is how do we focus on ad versus fit, and I think that's really where a lot of this comes down to. And we can think about this in the sense of leadership as well as how is what I'm doing adding, right? Like adding value, contributing versus fitting in. And that's also what we're talking about in terms of adaptability versus authenticity is am I continuing to add or am I trying to fit? And
mm,
I think that's where Gen Z is really going to challenge us because it's no longer be about fitting, where I think that's all it used to be. Just fit in, just survive, just belong, which is primarily how we function as humans. But we're being really driven by how do we add? What is the add here? And that's something I talk about with leaders is focus on cultural add, focus on team add, don't focus on team fit and culture fit. Because anyone can fit in if we push them hard enough to conform. But how do we get them to add more to our pool? How do we get more of their value that they can add? And I think that that's really powerful.
I think that's a beautiful place to land it rather than fitting in and conformity. Let's find ways to expand so we get everybody's magic.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Tash.
Oh gosh, what a conversation. We are planning probably to do 2 of these, so there's so many things that we can dive into, but I really hope for everyone that this was helpful. Thank you, Daria. What an amazing conversation, and thank you for really, yeah, challenging my thinking and being really, like, asked these questions because I talk about things very specifically on each episode. So thank you for giving me a space to share my thoughts, and I really loved that conversation between both of us. It was amazing. So look out for this episode. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. I will put Daria's information into the show notes, so you are welcome to connect with her. By the time this episode releases, her new book won't be too far away. So we might even have some information to pop into it then. But keep an eye out. Make sure you're following Daria and myself. And if you've got any questions, please let us know. And if there's anything that you want me to dive into in the leadership world, or if there are any people you would love me to interview, please let me know and I will make it happen. So thank you. Have a great week, and I'll be in your ears again soon with another Lead with Less.